The blizzard had swallowed the forest whole. Wind screamed through pine trees like wounded wolves. Snow fell in waves, erasing trails and blurring outlines. It was a night when nothing should have been moving. And yet, through the storm, came a sound no human should ever hear. Crying. Tiny. Desperate. Helpless. Not human, but heartbreakingly close. Deep in the Whitefall Ridge wilderness, 2 tiny bear cubs, no more than a few months old, huddled together beside a frozen log. Their fur was clumped with ice, their noses raw, their bodies trembling. They had been calling for hours, calling for a mother who wasn't coming back. And still, they waited. Miles away, Tom Barrett, a retired wildlife biologist, was parked on the side of a narrow service road. He had come out for a solo snow-tracking survey, something he hadn't done in years. He told himself it was for science, for old time's sake. But the truth was simpler. He was lonely. Since his wife passed, the cabin had grown quieter every day. The only time he felt anything stir inside was when he was in the wild. He stepped out of the truck, the cold biting instantly through his gloves. That's when he heard it. The wind shifted, and through the chaos, a faint cry. Then another. He turned sharply towards the trees. He moved fast, cutting through drifts up to his knees, flashlight low. As he reached a rocky drop, the beam of his light caught a flicker of motion, a quivering shape behind a fallen tree. Tom's breath caught. 2 bear cubs, alone, crying. He lowered his voice. Easy now. The cubs didn't run. They were too weak. One tried to lift its head but slumped forward. The other clung to its sibling, its mouth opening in a silent wail. Tom removed his parka and dropped to his knees. This was madness, but leaving them meant certain death. He wrapped them together in the thick coat, cradling both in his arms. They didn't resist. They just stopped crying. He carried them back, his body straining against the wind, one step at a time. By the time he reached the truck, his legs were numb and his face raw. Inside, he turned the heat on full blast, placed the bundled cubs on the back seat, and threw extra blankets over them. Their breathing was shallow, their fur soaked, but they were still alive. Back at the cabin, he laid them beside the wood stove, using towels to slowly dry their fur. He spooned warm water near their mouths, and after a few tries, the smaller one licked it. Tom sat there all night, blinking back tears. He didn't know where the mother was, but he knew one thing. If he had arrived even 10 minutes later, both would have been frozen solid. The next day, the news of a bear poaching incident spread across the ranger frequency. A female grizzly had been found shot not far from Whitefall Ridge. Authorities believed she had been traveling with cubs, but none were located. Tom's hands tightened around the radio. He looked over at the sleeping cubs beside the fire. "I found them," he whispered. But what he didn't know was that someone else had been looking for them too. 3 days had passed since Tom Barrett brought the frozen bear cubs into his cabin. He hadn't left their side since. The larger cub, who he quietly began calling Rusty, had started walking again. The smaller one, Pine, still limped but had survived the fever. Tom fed them with a baby bottle filled with warm goat milk, kept them wrapped in soft towels, and played old forest sounds at night so they wouldn't panic. But something was changing. At dusk, Tom noticed Rusty sniffing the window repeatedly. Pine followed. Then both began pacing. Low, soft growls rumbled in their tiny throats, not from fear, but from recognition. Tom stepped outside, clutching his coat. The air was still. And then he saw her. A full-grown grizzly, ragged and limping, emerged from the forest edge. Her eyes were hollow. Her right shoulder had a wound that hadn't fully healed, likely from a trap. She moved slowly, cautiously, and stopped a few meters away from the cabin porch. Tom's heart slammed in his chest. He knew this couldn't be the same mother who had died in the poaching report. This was another female, one who had clearly been tracking the cubs. But how? And why? Inside, the cubs grew restless. Tom opened the cabin door. The bear didn't move. He stepped aside, and the moment the door was open wide, Rusty let out a sharp, hopeful cry. Pine answered with a soft whimper. The bear's ears twitched, her head rose, and then she took a single step forward. Tom stood frozen. But the bear didn't attack. Instead, she moved slowly toward the cubs, not with the force of a wild beast, but with the grace of something familiar. She stopped at the threshold, looked at Tom, then looked at the cubs, and lowered her head. Rusty rushed to her. Pine followed. They nuzzled into her fur. She growled low, not in warning, but in welcome. Tom felt his knees weaken. This wasn't just a wild bear. This was someone who knew the cubs. Tom spent the next few hours watching from inside the cabin window. The bear didn't leave the porch. She curled herself around the cubs and rested her eyes, even as snow began to fall. That night, Tom made a decision. He built a sheltered den not far from his woodshed, using old tarps, hay, and pine branches, a safe space. And when the bear looked up at him the next morning, Tom pointed gently. "You'll be safer there." She moved slowly, cubs following, and for the next week they stayed, close enough to watch, far enough to stay wild. Each day Tom brought food, berries, scraps of cooked meat, water in a steel pan. Each time the bear waited until he left before eating. But the cubs, they'd come up to him, nudge his boots, curl beside his legs for warmth, and each time their mother watched, not to stop them, but to trust. One morning, Tom woke up and they were gone. No paw prints, no goodbye, just silence, and something else. Near the edge of the den, beneath a stone, was a small piece of bark. Carved into it, with claw or tooth, was a rough symbol. 3 shapes, 1 large, 2 small, a bear, and her cubs. A thank you. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. Tom returned to the same trail he'd found the cubs on, again and again. He didn't see them, until one day in late April, he was sitting by the creek, eating lunch, when the hairs on his neck stood up. Behind him, movement. He turned slowly. There they were, all 3. The cubs had grown. The mother was stronger, her fur fuller, her eyes alert. She didn't come close, but she stood on the ridge above him, watching. Then she bowed her head once. Tom smiled, didn't move. "I'm okay," he whispered. "So are you." Then, without a sound, the bear turned and disappeared into the trees, her cubs following behind her, no longer lost, no longer frozen. And from that day on, Tom told the story to anyone who would listen, of how the forest cried one night, and how answering it saved more than just 2 bear cubs. It saved him, too,